Hello friends, welcome once again to Nofu online math class. In this video, we shall continue with our works on mapping. We've dealt with the meaning of mapping and everything that concerns mapping, and here we are to discuss the types of mapping. Obviously, there are up to 5 types of mapping, but I'm discussing 4 in this video so that in subsequent videos, we shall deal with other categories of mapping. Okay, now when you talk about one-to-one mapping, it's just that kind of mapping where each element of the domain is assigned to a unique element in the codomain. That is, every element in the domain will have a unique image in the codomain. For example, now, this is the domain, and this is the codomain. And they map a max X into Y. Okay, assuming the elements of the domain are A, B, and C, while the codomain are, let's say, W, X, and Y. If all the elements of this domain are assigned to a single element in the codomain, and every element of the codomain is an image of the domain, we say that the mapping is one-to-one. You can see that how all of them are assigned to single elements. That is a one-to-one mapping. Okay, now you have the onto mapping. A mapping is said to be an onto mapping if every element in the codomain is at least an image of the element of the domain. I repeat again, a mapping is said to be an onto mapping if every element in the codomain is at least an image of an element in the domain. Remember, this is the domain, Y this is codomain, and you have element X be mapped into Y. Okay, so assuming this is A, B, C, D, for instance, and this is W, X, Y, Z. Remember, this is the codomain. Y here is the domain. Now, this is mapped into this, this is mapped into this, this is mapped into this, and this is mapped into this. This is mapping. So every element in this, let's say the codomain, is at least an image of an element in the domain. We say that the mapping is said to be onto mapping. Another case of onto mapping, because this onto mapping is also one-to-one mapping. This is also one-to-one mapping and still onto mapping, because onto mapping can be one-to-one mapping, but not every onto mapping is one-to-one mapping. For example, now, look at this. Let's say A is mapped into B. You have A, B, C, D. You have X, Y, and Z. For instance, this is mapped into this. This is mapped into this. This is mapped into this. And this is also mapped into this. You can see that Y is an image of 2 elements in A. This is still onto mapping because every element of the codomain is an image of an element in the domain. Okay, nothing is left behind. All of them are mapped to something. In fact, every one-to-one mapping is an onto mapping, but not all onto mapping is one-to-one mapping, because this is onto mapping, but it's not one-to-one. This is onto, but it's still one-to-one because all the elements of the domain are having a single image here. We still have identity mapping. Identity mapping, if an element is mapped to itself in a domain, in a codomain, you say that it's identity. For example, now, if you have, let's say, if you have something like this, A is mapped into B again. This is X, Y, Z. Maybe you have Z, Y, X, for instance. Z mapped into Z, Y mapped into Y, and X mapped into X. They are mapped to themselves. They are image of themselves. We say that this is an identity mapping. That is how an identity mapping looks like. Then finally, we have a constant mapping. A constant mapping occurs when every element in the domain is mapped to a constant element in the codomain. For example, now, if you take a look at this and you have A, B, C, you have K, C, M, for instance, X is mapped into Y. A is mapped into K, B is mapped into K, and C is mapped into K. All the elements of the domain are mapped into a constant element in the codomain. We say that this type of mapping is a constant mapping. So you've seen that we've carefully discussed the 4 basic types of mapping. And in my next video, I'll work on the composite mapping. And that is where we'll focus on the measure calculation that borders down to these mapping. I thank you for viewing, and may God bless you.